There is a moment in every man's life when the truth stands in front of him like a mirror he refused to look into. A moment when excuses crumble, when illusions crack, when the softness he nurtured finally demands its price. That moment is now. And the truth is simple, brutal, and unforgiving. You were never trapped, never cursed, never destined for mediocrity. You are not stuck. You are addicted to weakness. You inhale it as comfort. You swallow it as distraction. You defend it as identity. And then you wonder why your life refuses to move. Weakness is not a chain around your ankle. It is a drug in your bloodstream. And you are the one injecting it. The world does not imprison men like you. You imprison yourself. The mind is the perfect jailer because it convinces you that your cage is protection. It whispers that discipline is too harsh, that effort is too heavy, that discomfort is too unbearable. But understand this. Life punishes the weak long before it crowns the strong. And if your life feels ruthless, it is only reflecting the ruler inside you. Weakness becomes a habit, and habits become destiny. That is the law. 1. Weakness begins in the mind. Long before it appears in your behavior. Weakness never announces itself. It doesn't slam the door open or drag you to the ground. It walks in quietly. It waits. It watches. And it begins in a place most people never inspect. The silent corners of the mind. Every collapse starts as a permission slip you write for yourself. You don't fall because life is unbearable. You fall because, at some point, you decided the smallest betrayal of your own standards was harmless. You skipped one task because you were tired. You postponed one responsibility because you didn't feel like it. You avoided one difficult conversation because it made you uncomfortable. And your mind, always listening, always recording, took note. People believe weakness shows up in obvious ways: laziness, inconsistency, procrastination. Those are just symptoms. The real disease begins with a single mental concession, a moment where you tell yourself, "This doesn't matter, but everything matters." That is the truth people refuse to face. The mind is a strict accountant. It remembers every compromise you make with yourself, even the ones you quickly forget. When you allow yourself to break your own word once, the mind rewrites the rule. It upgrades the exception into a pattern. It teaches you that your commands are negotiable, your intentions are flexible, your promises are soft. And once the mind learns that you don't enforce your own standards, it stops taking you seriously. That is the birth of weakness. Weakness is not physical at the start. It has nothing to do with strength, environment, or talent. It is a psychological erosion, a slow, invisible wearing down of your internal authority, the authority that is supposed to govern your life. When that authority weakens, behavior follows. When behavior collapses, your life follows. People say, "I don't know what happened. Everything was fine. And suddenly, I fell apart." That is a lie they tell themselves to avoid responsibility. Nothing collapses suddenly. Collapse is always cumulative. Weakness grows quietly because it grows in the shadows of rationalization. You convince yourself that the task could be done later, that one moment of rest won't hurt, that skipping today won't affect tomorrow, that you can make up for it when you feel motivated again. But every time you do this, you reinforce a destructive identity, the identity of a man who abandons himself at the slightest discomfort. Once this identity takes root, weakness doesn't need to force itself into your behavior. You will express it naturally, automatically, because you have programmed your mind to submit before the battle even begins. Weakness is not a force, it is a habit, and habits are built through repetition. When you repeatedly choose comfort over discipline, the mind begins to crave comfort as if it were survival. It becomes addicted to the easiest path, the softest option, the least amount of friction. And addiction always wants more. It grows, it spreads, it consumes. Soon, the smallest challenge feels overwhelming. Simple tasks feel heavy. Basic commitments feel suffocating. Your life begins to slow, then stall, then sink. And you still think it's sudden. But it is just the final stage of a long mental decline you refuse to acknowledge. Weakness begins as a whisper, a soft internal voice telling you to take it easy, to rest, to wait, to avoid, to choose the path that demands the least from you. At first, you think you control that voice. Eventually, that voice controls you. It becomes the narrator of your life. the strategist of your decisions, the architect of your failure. The tragedy is that most people never realize the power they handed over. They keep looking for the external enemy, the unfair circumstance, the unsupportive environment, anything that prevents them from confronting the truth. The real battle was inside them, and they surrendered early. Weakness wins because it attacks where most men are unguarded, not in their actions, but in their thoughts, not in their muscles, but in their beliefs, not in their willpower, but in the quiet permissions they silently give themselves when no one is watching. You were not defeated when you failed publicly. You were defeated long before that, in private. Weakness is always born in the mind. Behavior is just its final echo. And once you understand this, you see the truth clearly. The battle is not against tasks, effort, or discipline. The battle is against the part of you that keeps granting weakness permission to exist. Kill that permission, and weakness dies. Keep granting it, and weakness becomes the only voice you hear. That is where every downfall begins, and where every transformation must start. 2. Comfort is the most dangerous enemy because it disguises itself as peace. Comfort is the most deceptive adversary a person will ever face, precisely because it never looks like an enemy. It feels calm, safe, familiar, and even deserved. It arrives without threat, without urgency, without consequence. When people warn you about danger, they talk about stress, hardship, struggle, challenges, competition. But those are not your real threats. Those forces sharpen you, force you to adapt, push you to grow, and confront your weaknesses. Comfort, however, works like a silent poison. It enters slowly, spreads quietly, and weakens you without your awareness. It seduces you into lowering your guard, softening your instincts, and abandoning the very traits that once made you hungry, alert, and alive. People imagine destruction as something violent, loud, catastrophic. They expect collapse to look like chaos, but comfort destroys you in the opposite way, gently, slowly, subtly. It doesn't break you, it softens you until you break yourself. The reason comfort is so dangerous is because it disguises its consequences. When you indulge in comfort once, nothing obvious happens. You don't lose your progress. You don't fall behind overnight. You don't become lazy instantly. You don't feel weaker immediately. The immediate effect of comfort is pleasure, relief, ease. And because the effect feels good, you assume the cost is small. But that assumption is exactly where the corruption begins. You tell yourself you need a break. You tell yourself you deserve to rest. You tell yourself you'll get back on track later. Comfort always gives you a reason that sounds rational, and you accept it because it aligns with what you want in the moment. Comfort collaborates with your impulses. It feeds your softness. It tells you what you want to hear. And while it offers temporary peace, the long-term cost is losing the edge you once fought hard to earn. Comfort weakens ambition because ambition requires friction. It requires a degree of dissatisfaction with where you are. It requires pressure to move forward. But comfort removes that pressure and replaces it with a false sense of security. You start believing you're okay. You start believing you're stable. You start believing you can relax because nothing is immediately threatening you. And slowly, the urgency that once made you grow begins to fade. You lose the hunger that built you, the drive that defined you, the intensity that once separated you from others. Comfort creates illusions. It convinces you that staying still is harmless. It convinces you that waiting another day won't change anything. It convinces you that there is always more time. But time is not generous. Time rewards the disciplined and punishes the delayed. The cost of comfort is always paid later, but with interest. Productivity declines quietly. Standards drop without resistance. Habits weaken without protest. Days become weeks. Weeks become months. And suddenly you realize you have drifted far from the life you once intended to build. Comfort is dangerous because it does not feel like a threat until the damage is already done. People say they feel stuck. They say they can't move forward. They say life is not changing. But the truth is that comfort froze them long before their circumstances did. Comfort removed the necessity to act. And without necessity, the human mind defaults to laziness every time. Comfort becomes the new normal, and discipline begins to feel extreme. The actions that once felt like the minimum now feel like a burden. You become softer, not because you chose weakness consciously, but because you unconsciously surrendered to ease. The most tragic part is that comfort is addictive. Once your mind adapts to softness, it craves it. It expects it. It seeks it. Discomfort becomes intolerable. Effort becomes painful. Hardship becomes overwhelming. The more you indulge in comfort, the less capable you become of facing life's inevitable challenges. You don't just become weaker. You become dependent on ease to feel functional. This dependency cripples your potential because any path toward growth demands discomfort. When you fear discomfort, you fear growth itself. Comfort is not rest. Rest restores you. Comfort decays you. Rest is intentional and temporary. Comfort is passive and constant. Rest strengthens you for the next battle. Comfort convinces you there is no battle worth fighting. Most people never rise to their capabilities, not because they lack intelligence, resources, or opportunity, but because they chose the warm embrace of comfort over the cold discipline of self-command. They prefer a soft life that slowly suffocates them over a challenging life that shapes them. They confuse calmness with progress. They confuse ease with stability. They confuse inactivity with peace. And by the time they realize the truth, they've already lost the edge they desperately need. Comfort is the enemy that smiles while it destroys you. It is the assassin that dulls your instincts before life demands sharpness from you. And the price you pay for comfort always arrives when you're least prepared to face it. The world does not reward the comfortable. It rewards the capable. And capability is forged only in discomfort. 3. Weakness grows when you avoid pain instead of learning to command it. Pain is not the enemy people think it is. Pain is neutral. It is information. It is a signal that something requires your attention, your effort, your growth, or your transformation. The real enemy is your relationship with pain, the fear, the hesitation, the avoidance. Weakness thrives in the space created by that avoidance. It grows in the gaps where you refuse to face discomfort. Every time you run from pain, you reinforce the idea that you cannot handle it. And that belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. People imagine strength as something you're born with, or something you stumble into by luck or circumstances. But strength is always built in the presence of pain. In fact, pain is the only environment in which strength can exist. Without pain, nothing grows. Without pressure, nothing evolves. Without challenge, nothing expands. This is a law of nature, a law of biology, a law of power. Yet most people are conditioned to run from discomfort as if it were poison, when in reality, it is the only antidote to weakness. Avoiding pain is how weakness multiplies. It begins with small evasions. The difficult conversation you avoid out of fear. The task you postpone because it forces you to confront your limitations. The goal you hesitate to pursue because it demands sacrifice. The truth about yourself that you refuse to acknowledge because it hurts your ego. Each avoidance teaches your mind that retreat is safer than confrontation. And the mind learns quickly. With repetition, retreat becomes your instinctive response to anything challenging. Pain does something else, something people rarely admit. It reveals your truth. It exposes your character. Not the version of you that you show to others, but the version you hide from yourself. Pain shows you how much discipline you really have, how much courage you really carry, how much commitment you actually hold. Most people don't avoid pain because it hurts physically. They avoid it because it destroys the illusions they have built about themselves. When you avoid pain, you protect your ego, but sabotage your future. You become a prisoner of your own softness. You create a life where anything uncomfortable feels impossible. You shrink your world to keep your fear unchallenged. You stop taking risks, not because they are dangerous, but because failure would force you to confront the truth about your lack of discipline. You sacrifice opportunity to protect your fragile self-image. And the more you avoid, the more fragile you become. Pain, when embraced, reshapes you. It sharpens your judgment. It strengthens your resilience. It disciplines your impulses. It forces you to develop skills, mental toughness, and emotional stability. It teaches you patience, endurance, humility, and adaptability. Pain is the tutor of powerful men because it forces growth through pressure, friction, and honesty. Weak men never learn this. They worship comfort. They seek shortcuts. They want progress without struggle, rewards without effort, status without sacrifice. They demand outcomes while refusing pain. This is why they collapse when life inevitably tests them. They have no tolerance for adversity. They have no backbone. They have no psychological armor. They are fragile because they avoided the very experiences that would have made them strong. Pain does not care about your feelings. It does not negotiate. It does not soften itself to make you willing. Pain will enter your life, whether you invite it or not. You either learn to command it, or you let it command you. Those who command pain are not fearless. They are simply willing to face what others run from. They understand that pain defines the boundary between who they are and who they want to become, and they cross that boundary intentionally. Pain teaches discipline by demanding it. You cannot escape it without consequences. You cannot delay it without increasing its price, and you cannot hide from it without weakening yourself. When you meet pain with resistance, you lose. When you meet pain with avoidance, you lose even more. But when you meet pain with willingness, curiosity, and control, you grow. You turn something destructive into something transformative. Pain is the training ground of power. The man who learns to operate under pressure, who learns to act despite fear, who learns to think clearly in discomfort, that man becomes impossible to break. When you build strength through pain, you develop an internal stability that no external circumstance can steal from you. You stop reacting emotionally. You stop collapsing mentally. You stop fearing the unpredictable. Pain becomes familiar, manageable, almost strategic. You stop avoiding it because you know you can withstand it. And here's the truth most people are too afraid to admit. Pain reveals your potential more honestly than comfort ever will. Comfort shows you the limits you imagine you have. Pain shows you the limits you actually have, and then forces them to expand. Weakness grows when you fear pain. Strength grows when you learn to command it. Pain is either your executioner or your instructor. The choice is decided by how you face it. 4. Your identity is built from the actions you repeat, not the dreams you fantasize about. Identity is not something mystical or hidden. It is not a secret buried in your past or a destiny waiting to be discovered. Identity is built in real time, shaped by the actions you repeat every single day. Not your intentions, not your hopes, not the visions you romanticize when you're bored with your own complacency. Your identity is nothing more than the accumulated evidence of your own behavior. And that truth is far more brutal than people want to admit. Most people live inside fantasies about who they could be. They create imaginary versions of themselves, disciplined, sharp, ambitious, respected, powerful, and then they confuse those fantasies for identity. They tell themselves stories about their future potential, not realizing that potential has no meaning without execution. They imagine a life of mastery and growth, but they live a life built on avoidance and hesitation. And then they wonder why their identity feels hollow and unstable. Dreams don't build identity. Repetition does. If you repeat softness, you become soft. If you repeat strength, you become strong. If you repeat discipline, you become someone capable of commanding himself. Identity is nothing more than a pattern hardened into personality. People tend to forget this because fantasy is more comfortable than responsibility. It is easier to imagine yourself as a disciplined person tomorrow than to actually behave like one today. It's easier to create a goal in your head than to build a habit in your life. It's easier to daydream about a new version of yourself than to kill the version that keeps losing. So people choose imagination over transformation. They mistake wishing for working. They believe thinking about greatness is somehow connected to becoming great. But reality does not reward imagination without action. Reality rewards patterns. Your mind does not believe what you tell it, it believes what you prove to it. If you tell yourself you're disciplined, but you repeatedly choose distraction, your mind adopts distraction as your identity. If you tell yourself you're committed, but your behavior is inconsistent, your mind adopts inconsistency as truth. The mind is brutally literal. It watches what you do, not what you claim. And it shapes your self-image accordingly. This is why so many people feel lost. Their self-image and their behavior do not match. They imagine strength but practice weakness. They talk about ambition but live in avoidance. They fantasize about change but repeat the same patterns. The conflict between what they want and what they do becomes a psychological war they cannot win. And over time, the fantasy dies while the habit survives. Because habits always survive. They are fed daily. Repetition is the foundation of identity, and it works in both directions. If you show up for yourself consistently, even in small ways, you become someone who can trust himself. If you break your own promises consistently, even in small ways, you become someone who cannot. That trust or distrust becomes the core of your self-image. A man who trusts himself becomes powerful. A man who doubts himself becomes paralyzed. Identity is not changed by intensity. People think a burst of motivation will transform them. They think one productive day will rewrite their entire life. But identity does not bend to emotion. It bends to consistency. It bends to what you do repeatedly, especially on the days you don't feel like doing anything. It bends to the evidence you generate through action, not to the excitement you feel in your imagination. A powerful identity is the result of thousands of small decisions made correctly. A weak identity is the result of thousands of small decisions avoided. When you repeat discipline, your mind begins to recognize discipline as normal. Effort becomes familiar. Hardship becomes manageable. Challenge becomes expected. You stop negotiating with yourself because the negotiations already have an established winner. You stop collapsing at the smallest resistance because your identity is built on the expectation of overcoming. This is the quiet shift that separates strong men from ordinary ones. Not a single heroic moment, but a repeated series of small victories. Weak men never understand this. They chase intensity. They chase motivation. They chase dramatic change. They chase the feeling of transformation instead of the process. And then they return to their old identity because their behaviors never changed long enough to create a new one. A man cannot escape the identity he continues to feed. If you want a different life, you must perform differently. And you must perform differently long enough for the mind to accept the new evidence. Identity requires proof, not potential, not belief. Proof. Once that proof becomes undeniable, the mind finally shifts, and with it, your entire life. You are not what you dream of becoming. You are what your actions make you. You are the evidence you repeat. Identity is earned. It is forged. It is built through daily choices. And every day, you are making one of two identities stronger, the one that leads you forward or the one that holds you back. The one built on discipline or the one built on delusion. Your life will always align with the identity you repeatedly reinforce. And the identity you reinforce is determined by the behaviors you choose, again and again, until they define you. 5. Most people are not held back by circumstances but by their loyalty to old patterns. People love to blame their environment. They blame their childhood, their finances, their stress, their relationships, their timing, the world, fate, and anything else that allows them to avoid looking inward. It is easier to point at external obstacles than to face the truth that the strongest chains are the ones you attach to yourself. Most people are not trapped by circumstance. They are trapped by their loyalty to the patterns that keep them weak. Patterns are powerful because they operate beneath awareness. They run automatically. They bypass logic, ambition, desire, and even hunger for change. You wake up each day with new intentions but follow the same habits you built years ago. You tell yourself you want transformation, but you act according to routines designed for survival, not growth. You keep repeating the same emotional responses, the same avoidance strategies, the same excuses, the same reactions, the same behavior cycles, and then you wonder why your life feels immovable. Circumstance may limit options, but patterns decide outcomes. The truth is ruthless. If your life repeats, it's because your behavior repeats. If your behavior repeats, it's because your patterns remain unchallenged. And if your patterns remain unchallenged, no external change will ever save you. You can switch environments, change careers, leave relationships, move cities, upgrade tools, start fresh, and still find yourself living the same story with different scenery because your patterns travel with you. People think they are stuck because life is unfair, but most are stuck because they defend the very habits that keep them stagnant. They cling to routines that feel familiar, even when those routines destroy their potential. They prefer predictable misery over unfamiliar discipline. They prefer emotional comfort over psychological evolution. They prefer the safety of repetition over the danger of becoming someone new. Patterns act like psychological gravity. They pull you back into old versions of yourself, versions you've outgrown but refuse to bury. And because these patterns feel familiar, they feel correct. Humans confuse familiarity with truth. You feel like the old behavior is who you are. when in reality, it is simply what you've practiced long enough to believe. There is a deeper tragedy here. People wait for motivation to break patterns, not understanding that patterns are what kill motivation. The mind will not generate energy for something it has already learned to avoid. Every time you choose procrastination, distraction, isolation, or comfort, your mind adapts. It learns to conserve effort. It learns to fear challenge. It learns to equate discomfort with danger. And once the pattern is reinforced enough times, even the thought of change feels exhausting. Patterns become prisons because they become identity. You start telling yourself that this is just how you are. Undisciplined, inconsistent, easily overwhelmed, easily distracted. Always starting, never finishing. Always intending, rarely executing. But these are not traits, they are rehearsed behaviors. And like any rehearsed behavior, they can be rewritten. But rewriting requires one thing most people avoid: disruption. True change begins with interrupting your own patterns, breaking the loop, violating your own script, acting in a way that contradicts the version of yourself you've repeated for years. This is where people fail. They want transformation without disruption. They want growth without discomfort. They want a new life without killing the patterns that belong to the old one. But you cannot evolve while protecting the behaviors that keep you small. Patterns must be shattered, not negotiated with. You cannot gently step out of an identity that was built through decades of repetition. You must deliberately break it. Most patterns survive because they're rewarded. Avoidance rewards you with temporary relief. Procrastination rewards you with momentary comfort. Emotional impulsiveness rewards you with instant gratification. Weakness rewards you quickly. Strength rewards you slowly. And people always choose the faster reward unless they discipline themselves to value the long term. The most dangerous pattern of all is the belief that your circumstances define you. Once you accept that lie, your mind stops looking for solutions. It waits. It hopes. It blames. It surrenders. Circumstances become an excuse for inaction, and that excuse becomes a lifestyle. Strong men recognize that circumstances matter, but patterns matter more. They understand that internal order produces external power. They know that their rituals shape their reality. They refuse to repeat behaviors that belong to a weaker version of themselves. They break patterns ruthlessly, not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. Transformation is not blocked by your environment. It is blocked by your commitment to behaviors that no longer serve you. You are not loyal to your potential. You are loyal to your patterns. And until you betray those patterns, you will never escape the life they create. Your life does not rise to meet your goals. It falls to match your patterns. 6. Power belongs to the man who can govern his own impulses. A man's impulses are the oldest, most primitive forces inside him. They existed long before discipline, long before strategy, long before intention. Impulses are instinctive reactions: the desire for comfort, the urge to avoid pain, the craving for pleasure, the hunger for validation, the pull toward distraction, the emotional storms that demand immediate release. Every human being has impulses, but only a rare kind of man can govern them. And that difference between having impulses and being ruled by them is the difference between weakness and power. Most people mistake freedom for acting however they feel. They think freedom means doing whatever impulse whispers to them in the moment. If they're angry, they react. If they're tired, they stop. If they're tempted, they indulge. If they're anxious, they escape. They believe this spontaneity makes them authentic. But authenticity is irrelevant when the thing expressing itself is undisciplined. Acting on every impulse is not freedom. It is enslavement. It is living at the mercy of moods, habits, cravings, and fleeting emotions. A man who cannot govern himself is governed by everything around him. The truth is that impulses are not malicious. They're simply primitive. They are built for survival, not greatness. They are designed to seek safety, not strength, pleasure, not progress, protection, not power. If you obey impulses, you regress to your lowest form. You become reactive instead of intentional. You live moment to moment, never building the consistency required for mastery. Weak men live this way and wonder why life punishes them. But life is not punishing them. It is simply reflecting their lack of internal command. To govern your impulses is to reclaim your authority. It is to separate thought from reaction, emotion from action, desire from decision. Governance means creating space between what you feel and what you choose to do. Weakness shrinks that space until feeling and action become the same. Strength expands that space until feeling becomes irrelevant to action. When a man can decide independently of how he feels, he becomes formidable. The world cannot manipulate him. His environment cannot destabilize him. His own emotions cannot sabotage him. He becomes the ruler of his internal kingdom, not its hostage. Most people have never experienced that kind of sovereignty over themselves. They live according to their cravings, routines, and impulses, and then they blame circumstances for their outcomes. They say they lack motivation, when they really lack self-governance. They say they are inconsistent, when inconsistency is simply the result of obeying emotion instead of principle. They say they can't focus, when their mind has been trained to respond to every impulse that offers temporary relief. Their life reflects the simple fact that they have never learned to command themselves. Governance of impulse is not achieved through force alone. It requires understanding. You must know your own patterns. You must recognize the impulses that sabotage you. The urge to postpone, the urge to check out, the urge to seek comfort, the urge to escape discomfort, the urge to numb yourself when discipline feels heavy. These impulses appear innocent because they offer relief. But the source of relief is often the root of weakness. Every time you obey an impulse that contradicts your goals, you weaken your identity. You teach your mind that your emotions hold more authority than your commitments. But when you resist an impulse, even once you change something fundamental, you prove to your mind that you are capable of acting without its permission. You demonstrate authority. You introduce a new pattern, the pattern of command. And identity slowly shifts, not through dramatic moments, but through quiet victories where desire loses and decision wins. Strong men build their lives around decisions, not feelings. They act regardless of mood. They continue regardless of discomfort. They pursue regardless of fear. They follow their principles, even when impulse tempts them to abandon everything. This consistency is not natural. It is trained. It is earned. It is forged through repetition. A man must deny his impulses enough times for the mind to learn who the real master is. As governance strengthens, impulses lose their power. They still exist, but they no longer control outcomes. Anger can rise, but reaction does not follow. Laziness can whisper, but action still proceeds. Temptation can appear, but discipline holds the line. Emotional friction becomes manageable instead of overwhelming. You stop being dragged around by the chaos inside you. You begin to command it. You begin to shape it. Power comes from the inside out. A man who cannot control himself cannot control anything else. He cannot influence others because he cannot influence himself. He cannot command respect because his actions are inconsistent. He cannot build anything lasting because impulses destroy more than they create. But a man who governs himself becomes someone others instinctively follow, not because he demands authority, but because he embodies it. Governance of impulse is the foundation of every form of mastery. Mastery of work, mastery of emotion, mastery of discipline, mastery of ambition, mastery of life. Without self-governance, everything collapses eventually. With self-governance, everything becomes possible. Power is not given to the strongest or the smartest. Power belongs to the man who can govern the storm inside him. 7. To break your addiction to weakness, you must kill the version of yourself that keeps choosing it. Every person has two selves living inside them, the one they wish to become and the one they keep feeding. The self you wish to become is disciplined, sharp, ruthless with time, loyal to growth, capable of sacrifice, capable of consistency, capable of command. But the self you keep feeding is the opposite. It is the self that seeks comfort, the self that avoids responsibility, the self that negotiates every commitment, the self that bows to impulse, the self that escapes anything demanding effort. That weaker self isn't a flaw in your personality. It is the identity you've rehearsed so many times that it became your default operating system. And as long as that version stays alive, no change will ever survive. Transformation demands violence not toward others, but toward the parts of yourself that keep losing. People make the mistake of trying to improve while still dragging their old patterns with them. They try to discipline themselves while still allowing the lazy version to influence decisions. They try to become consistent while still protecting the identity built on inconsistency. They try to elevate their life while still carrying the habits responsible for their collapse. They want to rise without burying what holds them down. It cannot work. You cannot carry the old self into the new life. One of them must die. Weakness survives because you keep allowing it to. Every time you say tomorrow, the weaker self survives. Every time you avoid discomfort, it survives. Every time you break your own promise, it survives. Every time you let emotion replace discipline, it survives. You keep resurrecting the version of you that sabotages your progress. You breathe life into your own enemy. And then you complain about being stuck. You are not stuck. You are loyal to the wrong identity. The weak version of you is not a ghost. It is fed daily. It thrives on every moment you choose ease over effort. It thrives on every excuse you craft to avoid discipline. It thrives on delay, on fear, on distraction, on emotional indulgence. It thrives on your refusal to confront your own patterns. And worst of all, you protect it. You defend it. You justify it. You speak for it. You use it to explain why you can't change, instead of using change to destroy it. Killing the weaker self does not mean hating yourself. It means refusing to let the untrained, undisciplined, undirected part of you dominate the rest of your life. It means creating a psychological execution, an internal point of no return where you decide that the behaviors of your old identity have no future. You must cut off the exit routes. You must close every loophole that allows softness back into your life. You must create a level of commitment that leaves the old you with no oxygen to breathe. This is why most transformations fail. People try to negotiate with weakness. They try to restrict it gently. They try to manage it. They try to reduce it. They try to balance it. But weakness cannot be balanced. If you leave it alive, it will always come back stronger. It will always wait for the moment your discipline slips. It will always exploit the smallest crack in your resolve. Weakness must be eliminated, not accommodated. To kill the weaker self, you must understand it. You must see where it lives, in hesitation, in emotional decision-making, in the stories you tell yourself when you want to avoid effort. Weakness has a voice quiet, persuasive, logical sounding. It whispers rationalizations that make surrender appear reasonable. That voice is your true opponent, not the tasks ahead of you, not the difficulty, not the lack of motivation, the voice within you that tries to protect the identity that has already failed you. When you start recognizing that voice as the enemy, the battle becomes clear. Every time you act in alignment with the stronger self, no matter how small you starve the weaker one, every time you act against your impulses, you suffocate it. Every time you stay disciplined when you don't feel like it, you tighten the noose. Every consistent action is a strike. Every disciplined day is a wound. And eventually, the weaker self loses its influence. Its voice becomes faint. Its arguments become weak. Its power evaporates. But this process is not gentle. Transformation requires a psychological death, an intentional execution of your former identity. There is no rebirth without burial. You must bury the version of you that procrastinates, that avoids, that fears discomfort, that collapses under pressure, that breaks commitments, that lives emotionally instead of strategically. That version must be treated as an enemy, not a wounded friend. Weakness has been stealing your time, your potential, your opportunities, your future. You owe it nothing. When you kill the weaker self, something remarkable happens. Space appears: mental space, emotional space, spiritual space. The noise inside you quiets. Decisions become simpler. Discipline stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like identity. You stop negotiating with yourself because the part of you that demands negotiation no longer exists. You begin acting with clarity, not chaos. You begin moving with certainty, not hesitation. You begin to trust yourself fully for the first time. The strongest men in history were not born different. They buried the versions of themselves that could not lead a powerful life. They killed their weaker identities with discipline, consistency, clarity, and unforgiving self-honesty. They knew that true transformation does not come from adding more effort. It comes from removing the identity that resists effort. Weakness dies when you stop feeding it. The stronger self rises when you stop protecting the weak one. Your life changes the moment you become ruthless with the parts of you that resist change. To break your addiction to weakness, you don't upgrade the old identity. You end it. And you begin again with a version of yourself that no longer negotiates with failure. There comes a point in every life where the noise fades, the excuses collapse, and the mirror stops lying. A point where you see yourself not as the person you pretend to be, but as the result of the choices you've repeated. In that moment, all illusions die, and what remains is the truth you've been avoiding. You were never outmatched, never outnumbered, never out of options. You were just unwilling to become the person your own future required. Weakness didn't win overnight. It won through small moments, moments you dismissed as unimportant. Every skipped effort, every ignored discipline, every retreat into comfort, every surrender to impulse, those were the bricks that built the prison you call your life. And now, the only path forward is the one you feared the most, the destruction of the identity that brought you here. You cannot rise while protecting the version of yourself that keeps falling. You cannot evolve while clinging to patterns designed for survival instead of power. Transformation is not a staircase, it is a threshold. You step through it only when the old self has died. So sit with this truth, not emotionally, but strategically. Your life will not change because you want it to. It will change because you become a man who can no longer tolerate weakness. A man who acts without negotiating. A man who rises without waiting. A man who refuses to serve the impulses that once ruled him. In the end, power is not given. It is not found. It is not discovered. Power is taken first from yourself, then from the world. And if there is one truth you carry forward from this moment, let it be this: a man is never trapped. He is only loyal to the version of himself that keeps him small. The day he kills that version is the day he becomes unstoppable.